He said she didn't belong at that company, didn't have the polish, didn't have the pedigree, didn't look like one of them. But what he didn't know was that she had spent her whole life opening doors no one else would touch, and every time one slammed in her face, she found a way to pick herself back up for one reason: her daughter, 7 years old, non-verbal, diagnosed with autism at 3. Her name's Jada, and if you ask me, Jada got more heart than most adults I know. But this story ain't about sympathy, it's about power, and how a man with too much of it tried to break a woman who had none, tried to embarrass her, tried to make her feel small, and in the end, he's the one begging her to come back. But let me take you back to how it all started. Her name is Danielle, 34, mother, real estate license, worked nights just to study, passed that exam with a toddler on her hip and no help, got hired at a corporate firm in Dallas, commercial real estate, big contracts, bigger egos, only black woman on her floor. The men wore the same smiles they used to use back in high school, right before they'd laugh behind your back. She saw it, heard it, felt it, but she showed up every day with her badge, her blazer, and her daughter's drawing in her purse. One time, I asked her why she never gave up. She said, because Jada watches everything, even when she can't say it out loud. Danielle wasn't late. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't loud. She just existed in a space that didn't want her to. And when Jada had a crisis at school, biting her own hand, screaming for hours, they called Danielle. Of course they did. She was the only one who knew how to calm her. Danielle missed one meeting. One. She called in, emailed, even asked a co-worker to forward the file. But that wasn't what mattered to him. No. To Mr. Ellis, her manager, it was about control, about reminding her where she stood. So the next morning, he waited till the office was full, pulled her into the glass conference room, and said words I'll never forget. You clearly have other priorities. Maybe this isn't the right environment for someone like you. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just picked up her things, took the drawing from her purse, and walked out with her dignity intact. But that's not where this story ends. Not even close. Because 2 weeks later, something landed in her inbox. And when she opened that email, everything changed. If you've ever had to work twice as hard just to be seen as half as worthy, take a moment for yourself. This story might be closer to yours than you think. The email came from an address she didn't recognize. No subject line, just one sentence. I thought you should know the file was never missing. Danielle stared at the screen for a long time. She knew exactly what file they were talking about. The Grayson pitch. Biggest potential client the firm had seen all year. She had worked late for 2 weeks straight on that presentation, running comps, outlining the property benefits, structuring the financing. All of it. The morning of the meeting, she had everything saved. She left a note on the shared drive, ready to go. But when Mr. Ellis opened the folder in front of the board, he said it wasn't there. He looked at Danielle, then looked at the others. And with that smug little grin of his, he said, well, maybe she wasn't prepared after all. She felt her stomach drop, not because she believed him, but because she could see how easily they did. That one moment, one lie, tore through months of work, and nobody asked questions, nobody checked the timestamps, nobody defended her. They just watched her pack up her things. But now, someone had. That email, it had an attachment, a screen recording, from the IT server. The night before the meeting, someone went into the drive, deleted her file, then uploaded a blank document with the same name. The screen showed the username. Ellis admin. She covered her mouth, not out of shock, out of rage. Because this wasn't just about her. It was about every late night she missed tucking in Jada, every skipped meal, every silent tear in the break room. He didn't just fire her. He tried to erase her. But now, she had proof, and she wasn't going to let him rewrite her story. She took a breath, closed her laptop, and walked to her daughter's room. Jada was sitting on the floor, lining up crayons by color. Danielle knelt beside her, put the drawing back on the wall, and whispered, I'm gonna fix this. What came next shook the entire firm to its core, because when Danielle walked into that HR office with a flash drive in her hand, she wasn't the same woman they tried to discard. She was fire in human form. But you know the worst part? It wasn't just the file. There was more, much more. The HR rep didn't even look her in the eye. Nameplate said Karen. Of course it did. Danielle sat there, flash drive in hand, voice calm, hands still. She'd rehearsed it, every word, every date, every step Mr. Ellis took to erase her work and her name. Karen listened, sort of. She clicked her pen, sighed once or twice, then leaned back and said, "That's a serious accusation. Are you sure you're interpreting this correctly?" Danielle didn't blink, didn't fumble. She simply slid the flash drive across the table, said, "Don't interpret anything, just watch." 2 days passed. No word. Then came the call, not from HR, but from Marta, the night janitor. She had worked that building longer than any of them. Nobody paid her much attention. That was their mistake. Marta spoke soft English, heavy accent, but her eyes saw everything. She said, "I saw him that night, Mr. Ellis. He made sure no one else was in the office. I was in the back hallway. I saw him leave with a folder. Then he locked the glass room. He never does that." Danielle's voice cracked. "Are you sure?" Marta replied, "I don't forget faces that pretend you're invisible." Turns out Marta had kept quiet for years. He made jokes about her accent, laughed when she walked by. Once told a contractor, "Don't worry, she's just the cleaning lady." But when she saw what he did to Danielle, that was the last straw. She said, "He targets women who don't fight back. I think he got the wrong one this time." Danielle smiled for the first time in weeks, not because the battle was won, but because she wasn't alone anymore. She reached back out to HR. Karen didn't answer, but someone else did. A new voice. Legal. And when legal gets involved, it means someone higher up is worried. Worried that maybe this time the woman they underestimated had a voice loud enough to echo. But here's the twist. Right when things started shifting in her favor, something happened at home. Something that broke her heart all over again and made her question if she could keep fighting. It started with a tantrum. That's what the teacher called it. But Danielle knew better. It wasn't a tantrum. It was overwhelm. See, Jada had sensory sensitivities, textures, lights. Even the sound of zippers could send her spiraling. That morning, her aide tried to force on a new pair of school-issued shoes. Rubber soles. Hard seams. No warning. Jada screamed so loud, the principal called Danielle from his personal line. By the time she got there, her baby girl was on the floor, clutching her feet, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down. No words, just pain. Danielle dropped to her knees, held her gently, whispered, "I'm here, baby. Mama's here." It took almost an hour for Jada's breathing to slow. The shoes lay in the corner, untouched. And Danielle, she sat on the floor of that cold school hallway, holding her child, while her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. It was HR again. This time, the tone had changed, suddenly polite, almost nervous. They wanted to reopen the discussion around her termination, said there may have been a procedural oversight. Danielle almost laughed. They weren't trying to do what's right. They were trying to cover their behinds. Still sitting on the floor, she looked down at her daughter, and something in her shifted. This wasn't just about getting her job back. It was about making sure no one else went through what she had. So that same night, she sent an email, not just to HR, but to every woman in that office who had ever lowered her eyes in silence. Subject line read, "You're not alone. I have proof. Let's talk." And one by one, the replies started coming in. A rep from accounting, a junior broker, even a receptionist who left 6 months earlier, each with a story, each with a file, each with a name, Ellis. Danielle opened a folder on her computer, named it Doors, because every one of these women had knocked. And now, they weren't waiting for permission. They were about to blow the whole thing wide open. But Mr. Ellis wasn't done yet. He still had one more trick up his sleeve. And this one was aimed straight at her daughter. He showed up at the school. Not in a meeting, not on official business, just appeared, standing in the front office, leaning on the counter with that same crooked smile. Mr. Ellis. Danielle didn't see him at first. She was in a parent meeting going over Jada's new IEP plan, trying to get her placed in a class that actually understood her needs. They were just wrapping up when the principal leaned in and said, "There's someone here who says he knows you from work." Danielle stepped out and saw him there, calm, confident, like he owned the air. And when he turned to her, he didn't blink, didn't flinch. He just said, "Danielle, I heard about your accusations. You really want to go down that path?" Not a question, a warning. Danielle looked around. Teachers, children, a security guard by the front. She held her voice steady, but her hands were tight. "You don't belong here." He shrugged. "Just checking in. Wouldn't want you making things worse for yourself. Or your daughter." That's when she understood. This wasn't just about saving his job. This was personal now. He was scared. And when men like him get scared, they reach for whatever power they think they still have. And he thought Jada was her weakness. But what he didn't realize? Jada wasn't her weakness. She was her fire. Danielle reported the visit. To the school, to HR, to legal. And when she mentioned his words, his tone, something shifted. Even Karen from HR called her back this time. Nervous, apologetic. Said, "We're taking this seriously now. There's going to be an investigation." But investigations take time. And Danielle, she was running on fumes, balancing therapy appointments, fighting the school for accommodations, helping Jada learn to use her new communication tablet, cooking, cleaning, applying for jobs that wouldn't hire her, and all the while, waiting for someone to do the right thing. But it wasn't a lawyer or a manager who gave her hope next. It was something smaller, gentler, something she found in the bottom of her daughter's backpack, and it nearly broke her. It was folded 4 times, crinkled from the ride home. Danielle almost tossed it, just another paper in Jada's bag, but something made her stop. She opened it slowly. It was a drawing. Crayons on thick paper, 2 figures, one tall, one small. Both had brown skin, curly hair, holding hands. But the small one had no mouth, just eyes. Big, wide, watching. And next to the tall one, 3 letters in shaky handwriting. M-O-M. Danielle sat down right there on the kitchen floor, held the paper to her chest. Tears fell without warning, because Jada couldn't say Mom, not with her voice, but she said it here, in this little drawing. And in her silence she told the whole story. Danielle kissed the page, whispered, "You don't need a mouth to speak truth, baby. Mama hears you." That night, she didn't sleep. She stayed up organizing the files. Each testimony from a woman who had been dismissed, belittled, overlooked. She cross-referenced timestamps, printed server logs, numbered screenshots. She was building something, not just a complaint, a case. And the next morning, she made 2 phone calls, one to a civil rights attorney, the other to a local news station. She didn't want revenge. She wanted dignity, and she wanted protection for herself, for Jada, and for every woman who had ever been told to smile while drowning. The reporter called back that afternoon. Young sister named Aaliyah, quiet but sharp. She said, "Your story isn't just about one man. It's about a system that doesn't know what to do with women who won't sit down and take it." Danielle nodded, because she didn't just want to tell her story. She wanted to light a match. But when Aaliyah asked if she had any final proof, Danielle paused, then walked to her bedroom drawer, unlocked the small wooden box she never let Jada touch. Inside was the missing piece, something she should have thrown away but kept, and now it might just be the end of Mr. Ellis. It was small, old, the kind of recorder folks used back in the day for class lectures or grocery lists. Danielle bought it 2 years ago when she was preparing for her real estate exam. She'd record herself reading legal clauses, then listen while she folded laundry, cooked, or sat in traffic with a crying toddler in the back seat. But after she passed, she tucked it away, out of sight, until that morning. The wooden box had her real estate license, her old name tag, a letter from the hospital when Jada was first diagnosed, and the recorder. She turned it on, and there it was, a voice, his voice, Ellis. He didn't know she had it, didn't realize that 3 weeks before he fired her, he'd called her into a meeting, alone, off the books, and started talking. He had been vague back then, said she seemed distracted lately, mentioned her personal obligations, then leaned in and said something that had haunted her ever since. I hired you as a risk, but I'm not running a daycare for struggling mothers. It was quiet, cold, and crystal clear on the audio. Danielle hadn't planned to use it. At the time, she thought maybe she'd misheard. Maybe he was just having a bad day. Maybe she was reading too much into it. But now, it was evidence, because what he said wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. Discrimination against caregivers, especially those caring for a child with a disability, violates federal labor law. And the moment her lawyer heard that clip, everything changed. Danielle watched the attorney sit back in her chair, fold her arms and say, "He just handed us the key." The next week the story went public. Not viral, not explosive, but enough that former clients started asking questions, enough that whispers began echoing down the company halls, enough that the board scheduled a closed-door meeting. Danielle didn't gloat, didn't post, didn't throw stones. She still had to make breakfast, still had to help Jada sort picture cards for speech therapy, still had to sweep the living room floor with one hand while answering interview calls with the other. But one evening, as she cleaned out the trunk of her car, she found something that made her freeze. It wasn't hers. It was slipped under the floor mat, folded, with her name in big block letters. And when she opened it, her knees nearly buckled. The paper was thick, folded clean, like someone took their time. No return address, just one sheet, typed, no greeting, no sign-off, only this. You should have known your place. You cost people jobs. I hope it was worth it. She won't be safe if you keep pushing. Stay quiet. Danielle's hand shook. She turned the paper over. Blank. Looked around the parking lot. No one. Just the hum of streetlights and the echo of distant traffic. She took 3 slow breaths, folded the letter again, slipped it into her purse without a word, and walked back inside. When she tucked Jada into bed that night, she held her longer than usual, kissed her forehead 3 times, then sat beside the nightlight, staring at her daughter's small hand wrapped around a stuffed elephant. Danielle knew fear. She'd felt it in hospital rooms, in late-night grocery lines with $12 in her account, in job interviews where she could see them judging her before she sat down. But this was different. This was someone trying to make her small again, trying to silence her. And something in her snapped. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for every mother who ever got told she was too much, too tired, too vocal, too messy, too complicated. So the next morning, she showed the letter to her lawyer. They filed a police report, installed cameras, alerted the school. And then she kept going. Because fear doesn't get the final word. Truth does. That week, her story aired on local TV, and something strange happened. Not just comments, not just likes, but letters from other women. One wrote, "He said the same thing to me when I left early for my son's cancer appointment." Another said, "I saw him delete a file once too. I was afraid to speak. I'm not anymore." Danielle printed every single one, taped them on the wall of her home office, right next to Jada's drawing with no mouth. She looked at them every morning, let them remind her that this wasn't just survival. This was testimony. But while the public was beginning to believe her, Ellis, he was unraveling behind closed doors. And the next time she saw him, he wasn't smug, he wasn't smiling, he was desperate. It was raining. Not a storm, just steady Texas rain, soft but endless. Danielle had just finished grocery shopping, mostly what Jada would eat, plain yogurt, white rice, strawberries if they were soft enough. She sat in the driver's seat a moment longer than usual, just breathing, and then, tap, 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 a knock on her window. She jumped, turned, and there he was, Mr. Ellis. No umbrella, no jacket, just a soaked shirt, a paper folder in his hand, and eyes that didn't look arrogant anymore. They looked tired. She cracked the window half an inch, didn't say a word. He leaned down and whispered, "Can we talk?" She kept her hands on the wheel. "You're not supposed to contact me, you know that." He exhaled hard. "I know, but everything's falling apart. I thought if I could explain—" She cut him off. "Explain what? That you lied? That you tried to destroy my name in a room full of men who laughed while I cleaned up your mess?" He looked down at the rain pooling around his shoes. Didn't deny it. Didn't apologize. Just held up the folder. "They're forcing me out, but I have things in here. Things that might help you, might hurt others. I don't know. I don't want this to end like this." Danielle stared at that folder. Not because she needed what was in it, but because she needed to see what he thought it was worth. He tapped it once against the window. "You win, Danielle. You win." She didn't respond, didn't reach for it, just slowly rolled the window back up. Let the rain muffle his final words, watched him stand there, deflated, then turn and walk away. She waited 10 minutes before unlocking the door, checked her surroundings, then picked up the folder from the windshield. Inside, handwritten notes, call logs, meeting memos he wasn't supposed to have, documents marked confidential, and at the very bottom, a single sheet of paper with one line: "Terminate Danielle S. Use missed meeting as grounds. Document loss, touch-in, fallback justification." No name signed, but the initials in the corner, K.R. Karen, from HR. Karen had always played it cool, neutral, smiling when convenient, cold when necessary. She wore power suits and neutral polish, said, "I'm just following protocol," like it was a prayer. But now, Danielle knew the truth. Karen wasn't neutral, she was complicit. And that note, it wasn't just strategy, it was a blueprint for destruction. For years, Karen had sat in the middle of complaints, misconduct reports, quiet firings. She had eyes on everything, and a heart full of nothing. Danielle scanned the note again, not shocked, not surprised, just clear. For the first time, she saw how deep it went. Ellis was the face. Karen was the foundation. Together they had built a fortress where women like Danielle weren't supposed to last. And yet, here she was, still standing. Danielle's attorney read the note and went still. "This isn't just wrongful termination. This is retaliation. This is exposure. We're talking about a full internal collapse." And collapse it did. The legal team moved fast. The board called an emergency meeting. Karen was placed on leave. Ellis was released from contract. And Danielle? She received an offer, a settlement, 6 figures. Silence, no lawsuit, no press, no public record, just a check, and a non-disclosure agreement. Danielle sat with it, held it in her hands. She could pay off debt, get Jada into a private therapy program, rest, start again. But then she looked at that piece of paper again, and thought about Marta and Alia, and the janitor who worked through lunch just to clean up after them. She thought about the receptionist who had emailed her late at night saying, "You gave us back our voice." Danielle folded the offer letter slowly, placed it in the same wooden box that held her real estate license and Jada's first diagnosis. Because some things, they're bigger than the paycheck. She called the attorney, said 2 words, "Let's fight." And what happened next would not only shock the company, but ignite a wave across the entire city. Because Danielle wasn't alone anymore. They didn't expect her to say no. Most people don't. When 6 figures are waved in your face, they think your silence can be bought, your pain can be packaged, your story archived. But Danielle? She'd already lost too much. Her time, her peace, her dignity. She wasn't about to trade her truth for their convenience. So when she walked into that courtroom, in her quiet heels, with her daughter's drawing tucked in the inside pocket of her coat, she wasn't shaking. She was ready. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it didn't need to be, because by then, word had spread. Danielle's name was being whispered in elevators, typed into private group chats between junior employees, mentioned by mothers who had walked away from that company in silence and were finally starting to speak. Some even showed up that day. sat behind her, didn't say a word, just showed up. That's power. Her lawyer opened with facts, dates, audio clips, server records, Ellis's own folder, Karen's initials. And then Danielle spoke, not loud, not rehearsed, just honest. She told them about Jada, the missed meeting, the conference room humiliation, the night she found the deleted file, the knock on her window, the threat left on her windshield. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She said, "You tried to erase me, but you forgot. I exist in the lives I touch, in the daughter I raise, in the truth I speak." Even the court stenographer paused, because some words don't need volume. They echo, and hers did. Through those halls, through the building that once tried to crush her, through the silence of every woman who had ever walked out without closure. But even after the testimony, even after the evidence, there was still one final piece that no one had seen yet. It came in an envelope, mailed anonymously, postmarked from within the company, and when Danielle's attorney opened it, she dropped it on the desk, because inside was a list of names, dates, and something far darker than Danielle had imagined. The list wasn't typed, it was handwritten, columns, initials, short notes beside each name, some with words like paid, moved to another division, no proof, dismissed, closed file permanently. At the top of the page, a title scribbled in red ink, Silences. Danielle stared at it, not out of shock, but recognition, because she remembered those names, faces from the office, the woman from finance who left without warning, the intern who cried in the break room and was never seen again, even Marta's niece, the one who was hired and gone within 3 weeks. Every single one had been pushed out, dismissed, erased, and now it was all here. Proof that this wasn't about her. It was a pattern, a system, one designed to silence, suppress, replace. Her lawyer looked pale. "If we turn this in, this becomes federal." Danielle didn't hesitate. Turn it in. And that decision lit the fuse. The story spread. Local news picked it up first, then the networks, then national outlets. Danielle's name wasn't just on the case file anymore. It was on headlines, podcasts, think pieces. People called her brave, strong, a fighter. But what they didn't know is that every morning, she still had to convince Jada to eat 1 spoon of oatmeal before school, still had to explain why loud noises weren't dangerous, still had to hold her when she melted down in the grocery store because the lights flickered too fast. Danielle didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a mother doing what needed to be done. And when people asked her what gave her the strength, she always said the same thing. You don't wait for someone to open the door for you. Sometimes you have to kick it down, with a child in your arms. But just when it seemed the storm had passed, Danielle received an invitation, hand-delivered, gold envelope, expensive paper. It wasn't from the court or a news outlet. It was from a new firm, one she'd never heard of, with one line at the bottom: "We believe women like you don't just belong, we build around them." And under that, a name she never expected to see again. It had been months since she'd heard that name, a name that used to mean hope, a name that once opened a door before it was slammed shut behind her: Tasha Freeman. Danielle met her in her first month at the old firm. Tasha had been a rising star, top closer, elegant, articulate, 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. But one day she just disappeared. No farewell, no goodbye lunch, gone. Danielle later heard whispers that Tasha had been pushed out after calling out a hostile culture, that she got too vocal, and when Danielle asked around, people went quiet. Now, her name was on this invitation: the new firm, Pillar and Rise Realty. Black-owned, women-led, based in Atlanta but expanding to Dallas. And under Tasha's name were the words, "I saw your story. I haven't forgotten what they did to us. Let's build something better, with you at the center." Danielle held that invitation like it was a fragile mirror, not because she didn't believe in Tasha, but because for the first time, someone wasn't just offering her a seat at the table. They were offering her ownership, the power to shape it, to protect others, to lead, but fear still whispered, what if it's too much? What if Jada's needs make this impossible? What if she fails? She looked at the invitation again, at the word center, and realized that's exactly what had been missing all along. See, Danielle didn't want to climb someone else's ladder. She wanted to build a house with her own blueprint, where the walls made room for children like Jada, where the break room didn't hide the pain of motherhood, where a woman didn't have to trade her soul for a paycheck. So she called Tasha, and when that warm voice answered, it felt like sunrise. They spoke for an hour, then two. By the end of it, Danielle wasn't just offered a job. She was offered partnership, strategy, visibility, power, but with one condition: you'll have to move to Atlanta. We'll cover everything, but we need you here physically. Danielle looked across the room at her daughter. Texas was home. So was routine. Jada had just gotten comfortable in her new therapy schedule. Could she really uproot it all? Could she start over? Again, she needed a sign, any sign. And that night, Jada gave her one, without saying a word. It was just before bedtime. The lights were dim. The air smelled like lavender lotion and warm rice. Danielle sat at the edge of the bed, flipping through bills, when she felt a soft tug on her sleeve. It was Jada, holding something, a sheet of printer paper, crayons still warm from her little hand. Danielle took it gently, looked down, and there it was, a drawing. This time, with a door, big, colorful, and in front of it, two stick figures, one tall, one small, both smiling, and between them, a crayon key, bright yellow, carefully drawn, no mouth again, but this time, eyes full of joy. Danielle looked up. Jada wasn't rocking, wasn't flapping her hands. She was standing still, watching her mother, as if to say, let's go. Danielle felt something loosen in her chest, because that drawing, that was the sign, the confirmation she hadn't even known she was waiting for. Jada was ready, not just to follow, but to walk through that door with her, together. Danielle reached for her phone, pulled up her email, typed, Tasha, let's talk relocation. I'm ready. She hit send, then held her daughter tight. But even as her heart swelled with possibility, even as the future opened wide before her, there was one final message waiting for her the next morning, an email from a name she thought she'd never see again. Subject line, Ellis, request for meeting. Danielle didn't respond right away. She saw the subject line, Ellis, request for meeting. She stared at it for almost a full minute, then clicked it open. Danielle, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I don't expect forgiveness, but I lost everything. I'm not asking for a job. I'm asking for a conversation, one human to another. No title, no company logo, just Ellis, a man without power, without cover, without a door to hide behind. Danielle sat with it, then closed her laptop. She didn't need to reply, because some doors, they're better left closed. The next week, she and Jada flew to Atlanta. It wasn't easy. The flight was overstimulating. Jada had a meltdown at the gate. Danielle cried in the airport bathroom, but they got there. And when they stepped into the new apartment, sunlight pouring through the windows, the walls still bare, Jada smiled. Not big, not loud, but real. Danielle opened her own office 2 months later, Director of Equity and Strategy. Not just a title, a mission. She redesigned policies, built caregiver protections, hired mothers with gaps in their resumes and strength in their bones. She didn't just change the rules, she rewrote them. And one afternoon, while unpacking a final box for her new desk, she found it again, the drawing, Jada's crayon door. She framed it, hung it near the window, and every time someone new entered her office, a woman who thought she wasn't polished enough, a single mom who almost didn't apply, a caregiver exhausted from being invisible. Danielle pointed to that picture and said, "We don't build walls here. We build doors. And this one, you don't need permission to walk through." She never heard from Ellis again, but sometimes silence is the apology. What mattered now was the life she built, the daughter she protected, the women she uplifted, and the freedom she refused to trade for comfort, because in the end, they thought they had the power, thought they had the keys. But the truth, she thought she worked for a man who had all the keys. But in the end, she was the one carrying the courage to open the right door.